Few people realize that a single misplaced glance could end a career at the Victorian court. Not a word spoken aloud, not a public insult, but a moment too long, a hand lifted at the wrong time, or a failure to observe silence when silence was required. In the Britain of Queen Victoria, etiquette was not decoration. It was law, power, and survival, written not in statutes but in ritual. By the middle of the 19th century, Britain ruled the largest empire the world had ever known. Yet at its very center, inside Buckingham Palace, Osborne House, and Windsor Castle, life followed rules so exacting that even seasoned aristocrats feared them. Court etiquette was not simply about politeness. It was a system designed to control access to the monarch, regulate hierarchy, and remind every soul present that proximity to power came at a price. Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, at just 18 years old. From the beginning, she insisted on formality. Diaries of courtiers, preserved in the royal archives, reveal that even seasoned noblemen were unsettled by the rigidity of her expectations. Every movement in her presence had meaning. One did not turn one's back on the queen. One did not sit unless invited. One did not speak unless spoken to first. These rules were not written on palace walls, yet everyone knew them, or learned them the hard way. The court itself was a place of constant observation. Servants watched guests. Ladies watched one another. Gentlemen memorized the order of precedence with almost military precision. A duchess ranked above a countess. A lady-in-waiting outranked a noblewoman if she stood closer to the queen. Etiquette decided not only where one stood, but whether one existed at court at all. Sound mattered. The echo of footsteps in long corridors, the rustle of silk dresses, the soft knock announcing entry into a drawing room. Even breathing seemed restrained. Smoking, once common among aristocrats, was forbidden in many royal interiors. Laughter was moderated. Emotion was controlled. Excess feeling was considered vulgar, and vulgarity was a social crime. But beneath this polished surface, anxiety ruled. Invitations to court presentations were rare and coveted. A single mistake during a formal presentation could haunt a family for years. Mothers trained daughters relentlessly, drilling them in the precise depth of a curtsy, the angle of the head, the correct withdrawal from the monarch's presence. There was no margin for improvisation. Every gesture had already been decided decades before. Yet what makes Victorian court etiquette so unsettling is not how refined it appeared, but how unforgiving it truly was. Because behind the candles, uniforms, and ceremony, there existed a system designed to exclude as much as to impress. And in the archives, quietly waiting, are records that show just how severe the consequences could be. The most feared moment for any young woman of status was her formal presentation at court. This ritual, usually held during the London season, was the gateway to respectable society. Without it, a woman was effectively invisible. With it, she became subject to constant scrutiny. The rules governing this single appearance were astonishingly precise. According to court manuals used throughout the 1840s and 1850s, a debutante's dress had to be white, with a train of a specific length depending on rank. Jewelry was permitted, but only certain stones and never in excess. Ostrich feathers were required in the hair, arranged in a prescribed manner. Gloves were mandatory, yet they had to be removed at exactly the right moment. Too early was disrespectful. Too late was ignorance. The curtsy itself was a trial. Contemporary accounts describe young women practicing for months, sometimes collapsing from exhaustion. The movement demanded balance, grace, and absolute control. One hand guided the train, the other remained poised. The eyes were lowered, but not too far. Eye contact with the queen was permitted briefly, then broken. When rising, one stepped backward without turning, retreating until safely out of immediate royal presence. Failure was not theoretical. In 1862, records mention a young woman who stumbled during her curtsy and nearly fell. The incident was not dramatic. Yet it was noted. Invitations ceased. Her social prospects quietly dissolved. No public scandal followed, only absence. men faced a different but equally rigid code. Military officers wore full dress uniforms, decorations carefully arranged. Civil servants appeared in prescribed court dress, including knee breeches and silk stockings, long after such fashion had vanished elsewhere. Hats were removed at specific distances. Swords were carried but never touched. Even facial hair, increasingly fashionable in Victorian Britain, was subtly regulated at court, where excess was frowned upon. Conversation with the monarch followed its own rules. The Queen chose the topic. Replies were brief, respectful, and neutral. Wit was dangerous. Opinion was riskier still. Diaries reveal that Queen Victoria valued seriousness and moral restraint. Those who attempted charm often found doors quietly closing afterward. But etiquette did not end with the monarch. The court functioned as a living hierarchy. One addressed others strictly by rank. A mistaken title could cause lasting offense. Seating at dinners followed exact precedence, calculated down to minute distinctions. Being placed lower than expected was interpreted as a message. And at court, messages were rarely accidental. What makes this system remarkable is how little flexibility it allowed. Outside the palace, Victorian society was changing rapidly. Industry expanded, cities grew. New wealth challenged old privilege. Yet inside the court, time seemed frozen. Etiquette became a barrier, protecting tradition from intrusion, and it worked, often brutally. However, the most revealing truths about Victorian court etiquette emerge not from ceremonies, but from moments when the rules were broken, intentionally or otherwise. And some of those moments were carefully recorded. Among the most revealing documents are private letters written by ladies-in-waiting, women who stood closest to the Queen yet remained socially constrained. Their writings, preserved in fragments, describe an environment where etiquette served as both shield and weapon. A lady-in-waiting could outrank a duchess within palace walls, yet lose that authority the moment she stepped outside. One such letter, dated 1871, describes a court reception where a prominent noblewoman spoke out of turn, addressing the Queen directly without invitation. The silence that followed was immediate. No reprimand was issued, no scene occurred. But the following season, her name vanished from guest lists. Etiquette punished quietly, efficiently. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Victorian court life is the role of silence. Silence was not emptiness. It was communication. When Queen Victoria disapproved, she often said nothing. Courtiers learned to read pauses, glances, and absences. A delayed response could carry more weight than a spoken rebuke. There were also rules governing grief. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, the court entered extended mourning. Black clothing became mandatory. Jewelry was restricted to jet. Social events were cancelled or subdued. Yet even mourning followed regulation. The depth and duration of grief displayed by courtiers were observed. Excess emotion was discouraged. Insufficient solemnity was worse. Foreign visitors found the system bewildering. Diplomats from France and Italy noted the severity of British court etiquette in their reports. Where continental courts allowed conversation and spontaneity, Victoria's court demanded restraint. Some mistook this for coldness. Others recognized it as discipline. The true power of etiquette lay in its invisibility. No guards enforced it. No written penalties existed. Yet everyone complied. Because etiquette controlled reputation, and reputation controlled access. To be excluded from court was to be excluded from influence, marriage alliances, and political relevance. Yet the most striking revelation comes from a document rarely cited outside academic circles. An internal memorandum from the Lord Chamberlain's office outlines procedures for discouraging unsuitable attendance without formal refusal. It recommends delays, omissions, and silence. Etiquette, here, becomes strategy. This was not merely about manners. It was governance by ritual. Control exercised without command. Authority maintained without force. And it explains why Victorian court etiquette endured even as the world beyond palace gates transformed. By the end of Victoria's reign in 1901, many of these rules would begin to soften, yet their legacy remains embedded in modern royal protocol. What appears ceremonial today was once absolute, and understanding that changes how we see the polished images left behind. Victorian court etiquette was never designed to make people comfortable. It was designed to make power visible. Every rule, every pause, every carefully measured gesture reminded those present that the monarchy was not merely an institution, but a presence that demanded submission through ritual. What survives in photographs and paintings is elegance. What survives in archives is tension. The stiffness of posture, the controlled expressions, the calculated movements were not aesthetic choices. They were survival mechanisms within a system that rewarded obedience and punished deviation without explanation. Queen Victoria herself understood this deeply. Her journals reveal a woman acutely aware of symbolism. She believed that dignity preserved authority, and that authority preserved stability. In a century marked by revolutions elsewhere in Europe, British restraint became a form of quiet defense. Yet the irony is unavoidable. The very etiquette meant to preserve distance also created fascination. The mystery of the court, its silence and formality, fed public imagination. Newspapers hinted, biographers speculated. The absence of detail invited myth. Today, when modern audiences see royal ceremonies, they often interpret them as tradition for tradition's sake. But in the Victorian era, etiquette was an active force. It shaped lives, it ended ambitions. It elevated some and erased others without ever raising its voice. To understand Victorian court etiquette is to understand a society that believed order must be visible to endure. That belief shaped Britain at the height of its power, and traces of it remain, subtle but present, in every carefully staged royal appearance that followed. History rarely speaks loudly. More often, it whispers through protocol, through pauses, through rules that seem harmless until examined closely. Victorian court etiquette is one of those whispers, controlled, exact, and revealing if one knows how to listen. If these hidden structures of Britain's past matter to you, consider subscribing to this channel. Your thoughts and interpretations are always welcome in the comments. This space is for those who prefer history unpolished, examined carefully, and understood in full.